Dim light glows through the windows of the cabin. A trickle of dust spins like snow in the blackness. Two men sit on the opposite sides of a desk. Between them the cards with which to read stars and fortunes, illuminated by a small lantern, within which lives the smallest ember. "The stars?" queries the captain. He is a large, fat man, a veteran buccaneer, now a merchant, forced by his crew to turn pirate. "What do they tell me?" The astrologer, brought to the captain from London town, absently moves the wheels of a card, intricately painted with mystical arcana. "Come now, what do they say?" The astrologer looks up. "They say, beware of fire." The ember within the lantern suddenly fluctuates, appearing to shudder. A trick of the eye, excitement perhaps. The demonic hunger lurking in each and every flame, the promise of wildfire to devour. The captain recoils. The wooden ship creaks around them. He wipes a pearl of sweat from his brow. The tropics are hot and dry. He rises from his seat, turning around. A hand grips him like a vice. "Be careful, my captain," says the astrologer. He opens up the lantern and turns to it. Wetting his fingers, he snuffs out the ember with a low hiss, followed by silence. The ship creaks, a floating pile of tinder and matchwood. January 1685. Captain Swan exits the cabin of his ship, the Signet, staring out at the Isles of Perico, lying in the Bay of Panama. A fiery sun settles in the horizon. Night comes. Captain Swan and his company had agreed to meet with a Spanish smuggler. They are forbidden from trading with anyone but the galleons. Illicit traffic is rampant, buying cheap luxury goods at cut rates from cutthroats, never mind the blood. As the blue hour turns into night, the lookout cries, "O sail! O sail!" It is not the cumbersome trading bark the pirates expected, but a light, nimble vessel. She practically speeds towards them. A few of the pirates are suspicious. As they approach, the vessel hails them with the password agreed upon. The pirates rejoice. Captain Swan is not amused. He picks up his speaking trumpet, demanding that the vessel drops anchor. It does not. Narrowing his eyes, he sees upon the deck but a skeleton crew. In the rigging hang hooks, as if to entangle to another ship. His eyes widen. He sees that fickle ember dancing within the lantern, shuddering with excitement. "Fireship!" he calls out, his voice cracking. The men erupt in confusion. "Shoot 'em! Shoot 'em!" With their muskets, swivels and great guns, the pirates give fire. The Spaniards on their fireship get into their canoes, and a flame appears. They set fire to the ship. Still sailing towards the Signet at the highest speed, the inferno soon envelops the entirety of her hulk. An explosion erupts from the hold, and the heat can be felt aboard the Signet. Cannons primed to fire detonate from the heat. Swan orders the anchor cables cut and the sails set post-haste. Slowly, the Signet glides from her paws, the fireship ever approaching. It slips past them. They manage to get away just in time. As the islands fade into obscurity, the burning fireship remains there in the dark void between the sea and starlit sky, ever fiery, eager to consume. Fire was one of the deadliest hazards aboard a wooden ship. Regulations were strict. You were not allowed to smoke below deck without a cap on your pipe, bring candles without a lantern, or flambe a creme brulee. Aside from the woodwork growing dry in the summer and tropics, it was painted with a protective layer of tar, a waterproof but flammable substance. also mixed in a variety of incendiary weapons, used in naval warfare to destroy enemy ships. Fire at sea is an ancient tactic. The Vandals used it to destroy the Roman fleet near Carthage. The Byzantines dominated the Mediterranean Sea with the use of Greek fire, a terrifying proto-napalm shot out of dragon-shaped flamethrowers. In the Age of Sail, a variety of nasty devices were used by men-of-war, privateers and pirates to scorch enemy ships, rigging, sails, and their fellow men. These weapons included handheld bombs, arrows fired from blunderbusses, and spinning balls of fire blasted out of cannons. The most terrifying incendiary weapon was the fireship. This was an old vessel, now useless or captured from the enemy, or even built for this nefarious purpose, loaded up with combustible materials, overcharged cannons, and other hellish devices, all arranged by a skeleton crew to be set alight and directed upon the enemy. If another ship was rammed by this horrifying contraption, the hooks in their rigging would entangle the vessels, as the fire spread and engulfed the both of them. It was only a matter of time before it reached the powder magazine, and blew them both and all of the crew to Kingdom Come. A wise captain would get away in time. Indeed, the purpose of fireships wasn't necessarily to destroy the enemy, but to disrupt formations, allowing your forces to move in organized and pick them off. The use of fireships dates back many thousands of years, and the tactic wasn't especially innovative in the 17th century, aside from various improvements. For the most part, they were old vessels who didn't have any other purpose anymore, other than to be turned into a living missile. These included prize ships, merchantmen bought for pennies, or obsolete warships. English fifth-rates were at several points in the 17th century reclassed and converted into fireships with the implementation of newer models. In 1666, old fifth-rates were used to great effect by Robert Holm at the Battle of Lee, nicknamed Holm's Bonfire. It caused the destruction of 170 Dutch merchantmen. The fireships were used to great effect throughout the 17th century. Initially, they were favored by the French and Dutch, who used them to great effect against the Spanish and English in such engagements as La Rochelle in 1628 or Guetaria in 1638. In French, they were known as brûlons, meaning burner. 1672 marked the golden age of fireships, when a Dutch fireship was able to destroy the 100-gun Royal James, one of the largest ships of the period. Named after the King of England himself, the loss was as embarrassing as it was costly, while only costing the Dutch a couple of dollars. This decade saw the rise of the purpose-built fireship. Unlike converted vessels, these were designed from the bottom up to be the perfect missile. So in this segment, we will look at its construction, since many of its design choices would have been implemented into the improvised fireship. Firstly, the fireship was built to be speedy, akin to a frigate or sloop. The ones constructed in the 1670s had a weight of between 200 to 250 tons, akin to the 6-rates of the Royal Navy. However, they were soon discovered to be too costly for their purpose, and fireships of lesser dimensions were ordered. They had fine, narrow lines with a sleek tumble home. I'm not certain what kind of wood they would have used. Oak was the most common in general, and maybe it was used to make it harder to sink by the enemy. But a lighter wood type may have been cheaper and speedier. If the fireship was destroyed, it wasn't always a big deal, since it at least distracted the enemy. Whatever the material, the decks were impregnated with melted rosin to make them more flammable. The 1672 model had a length of 97 feet and a breadth of 24 feet 8 inches. The hold was 9 feet 8 inches deep, and the minimum height between decks was 4 feet 6 inches. They had both a quarterdeck and forecastle, with the latter being tall enough to feature a cook room, the ship's kitchen. Some did seemingly have fancy enough decorations. It's an incredibly 17th century thing to even have decorations on ships intended to be destroyed. But they were sleeker than other vessels. Of course, you can't give the purpose away too soon. It's best to make the enemy think it's just a regular frigate. The hull was supplied with 2 full decks. The lower deck was known as the fire room. Its sides were pierced with ports, but unlike gun ports, which were usually hinged from above or the side, the ports of a fireship were hinged from below, designed to fall down when the fires burned their tackles. This created a draft which would fan the flames, and fire would spew out of the ports like dragons. To further increase the circulation of air, chimneys were fitted from the lower deck to the upper. This lower deck was also stocked with combustibles. Most common were fire barrels. These were loaded with reeds, bundles mixed up with pulverized sulfur, and filled in with a mass of sulfur, pitch, tar, and tallow. Fire trunks were of a similar construction. Rather than being placed pell-mell, the combustibles were organized in a regimental manner to burn most efficiently. Sometimes you could put explosives aboard a fireship, but it wasn't so common, since it risked killing the crew as they escaped, or could even sink the fireship before reaching its target. The back of the lower deck was supplied with a large sally port, through which the skeleton crew could escape into their rowboats after setting fire to the ship. They only needed a small crew, between 25 to 45 men, 5 of which were officers, the rest were regular sailors. The lower deck was also armed with around 8 guns, usually 6-pounders, so that she could defend herself or maybe even catch a prize or 2 under the right conditions. The upper deck was separated from the former not by an actual full deck, but rather a lattice work. This costed less wood, provided more circulation, and still allowed the storage of combustibles. Fireships were ship-rigged, 3 masts with square sails. Under optimal conditions, this would provide the best possible speed. It would be difficult to handle by the small crew, but they only really needed to set full sail, set fire to the ship, and then leave it in battle. The lower masts were protected from fire by cofferdams, to prevent them from breaking before reaching the target. Most prominent for the masts were the grappling hooks mounted at the ends of the bowsprits and yardarms. As aforementioned, these were meant to latch onto enemy rigging, hugging the 2 vessels together into a final, fiery fandango. Finally, the fireship had to be given an appropriate name, and they were often christened with hints to their speed or final purpose. Names like Griffin, Hawk, Hunter, Lightning, Phoenix, Terrible, Firebrand, and Vulture. When the fireship had been built or converted, it was ready to be used. In a battle at sea, the fireships were usually sent off first as a vanguard to initiate the engagement, to destroy cumbersome flagships, or even just to cause chaos and distortion among the enemy. The crew would begin by preparing the combustibles, removing all of the protections. The grappling hooks were fixed onto the ends of the bowsprit and yardarms. Sailing the fireship also required a skilled captain. He had to keep sufficiently out of the enemy's line of fire to avoid being disabled or even sunk before reaching the enemy. In some cases, actual ships may be provided to escort the fireship before the final sprint. Every step had to be executed punctually. Any mistake could lead to the death of the entire crew or even strategic disaster. When the enemy was within range, the helm was lashed to continue in the current direction, and everyone ran to the fire room. Here they started a fire, made sure that it burned, and quickly escaped through the sally port and into their rowboats. Now, they had to get back to safety before the enemy started firing upon them. Usually, they were quite distracted. Pirate fireship tactics wouldn't have been so formal, but certainly similar. One of the most famous uses of a fireship was by Charles Vane in 1718. He was trapped in the pirate town of Nassau blockaded by the fleet of Governor Woodes Rogers. To break the siege, Vane turned his full-rigged flagship into a fireship, directing her upon the enemy like a missile. This broke up Rogers' fleet, allowing Vane to escape in a small sloop. Even though Captain Swan fell victim to a fireship himself in 1685, as described in the intro from Dampier's account, his fleet and associates also utilized fireships. Dampier described how they turned a small 30-ton bark into a fireship, manned by the crew of a canoe. The entire fleet was significant, consisting in total of 960 men, both French and English. But they never achieved anything significant, and split up after a Spanish deception. The firebark was never made use of. As for the fireship deployed by the Spanish smugglers, she had been constructed by an English renegade, Captain Bond.
We meet again, Mr. Bond.
Though Swan and Dampier survived the fireship, it certainly grinded their gears, and when they captured one of its crewmen, they hanged him on the spot. The Buccaneers did really not appreciate being deceived. Swan had most likely taken the idea of a Buccaneer fireship from his old commander, Harry Morgan, who made the most effective use of a pirate fireship in 1669 during his attack on Lake Maracaibo. Having sacked the town of Gibraltar, Morgan and his fleet were boxed in by a Spanish pirate hunting fleet. In order to disperse them, Morgan made a fireship from a captured Spanish vessel. Exquemelin described the modifications in some detail, and it is likely that these techniques were deployed by other pirates who converted prizes into fireships. Partly because pirates and sailors had a tendency to read the works of their associates. Anyway, they cut down the outworks of the ship to make her speedier and allow the fire to burn more effectively. Additional ports were added to improve ventilation and make the ship seem more heavily armed. Barrels of pitch, tar, and brimstone were loaded aboard the ship, along with an improvised combustible made of gunpowder, brimstone, and palm leaves, painted with tar. But Morgan's most clever ruse came in disguising the Brulon as his flagship. The ports were supplied with fake cannons, large drums painted black, and upon the open decks he arranged wooden dummies, dressed with bandoliers, Montero caps, swords and muskets. Finally, a large English ensign was flown from the stern of the ship. On the 30th of April, 1669, Morgan's fleet set sail. At dawn, the fireship was directed upon the unsuspecting Spaniards and grappled the admiral. Fire soon engulfed the both of them, and despite Spanish attempts to save their vessel, an explosion sent her to the deep. The second Spanish ship panicked and ran aground. The last one was boarded by Morgan and his pirates, and surrendered without much of a fight. It was one of the greatest sea battles of the Golden Age, and if you want to learn more about it, I have it included in a video from last year featuring a number of extraordinary fights from the period. The fireship peaked in 1692, when they were used at the Battle of La Hongre to destroy the French flagship, the magnificent Soleil Royal. Weighing 1,630 tons, that's a mouthful, and carrying a complement of 1,200 men and 112 guns, she was a terrifying feat of engineering and Baroque art, requiring 2 full years to construct and an unimaginable amount of treasure. As the flagship of the Escadre du Ponant, she was named after Louis XIV, the Sun King. After managing to repel a horde of 17 ships, a rogue fireship set fire to the gilded stern of the Royale, and the flames soon spread to the magazine. The fireships were used throughout this massive engagement, which lasted several days and was supposed to prelude an invasion of the British Isles, intended to reinstate James III Stuart to the throne. The French defeat ended the last good chance of a Jacobite restoration, and fueled generations of anti-government sentiment, popular among a lot of pirates who supported the Stuarts. It also had a lasting consequence on French naval strategy. Having lost this expensive behemoth, They decided instead to focus on light frigates, cruising and commerce warfare instead of battle fleet strategy. If your ship was targeted by a fireship, the first and most important thing was to detect it. It could be distinguished by its behavior and aforementioned qualities. A clever fireship captain would thus attempt to disguise his movements before it was too late. When the fireship was detected, the defender had to get underway. There was no time to hoist the anchor. The cables were just cut with axes, and the sails speedily hoisted. If the ship had oars, it was best to row out of position. But even if you were mobile, the fireship might still attempt to come after, so you had to prepare a running fight, aiming to disable the fireship's rigging. If you were too slow and the fireship caught onto you, there was still a chance of survival. Your ship could be drenched in water and flameproof materials. Best was sails or other large bits of cloth, also soaked in water. These could be laid along the side, the border with the fireship. The powder room had to be locked up and secured, kept away from any possible fire, and cartridges and ammunition removed from the exposed decks. Men with axes would have to work continuously to cut away burning bits of wood, while men in the masts would have to untangle the riggings of the two ships, so that you could get underway. All of these decisions might cripple the vessel or fighting performance, weakening you before the enemy's true assault. It might also be too late, or the crew too poorly organized. These measures would require extraordinary organization, command, and bravery. Escape might be the better option. The destruction of the Royal James in 1672 didn't just see the rise of purpose-built fireships, but of sloops built to counter them. Instead of trying to sink the fireships, they would move up to the fireship, grapple, and then pull them away from the rest of the fleet. Again, this heroic assignment would require a lot of skill, and bravery more so. William Dampier had the honor of witnessing this tactic himself. He described it as follows. The French appeared, coming into the road with their lowest sails and topsails, and had with them a fireship. With this they thought to have burnt the Dutch Commodore, and might probably enough have done it, as she lay at anchor if they had the courage to have come boldly on. But they fired their ship at a distance, and the Dutch sent and towed her away, where she spent herself without any execution. Womp womp womp. So in this instance, it maybe wasn't so much about Dutch bravery as French incompetence. For the rest of the battle, they avoided taking initiative, shooting from a distance, before eventually retiring. Since the fireship was built to be speedy, they were increasingly built as hybrid vessels, not only intended as living bombs, but could have secondary assignments as escorts, commerce raiders, privateers, pirates even, and pirate hunters. Some fireships that never saw use were instead converted into 6th or 5th rates. The most notable case is the long-lived HMS Phoenix. Purpose-built as a fireship, according to the instructions in the construction segment, the Phoenix was deployed throughout the wars of the late 17th and early 18th century, without ever actually being used. In 1707, she even ran ashore in the Isles of Scilly and had to be beached. Eventually she was made seaworthy and reached Portsmouth. Here she was refitted into a 24-gun 6th rate, without seeing any more real success. In 1709, she was damaged in a collision and had to be repaired again. The Phoenix crossed the Atlantic to New England, and then back to Europe, where she served in the Baltic Sea. Notably for the history of pirates, she was deployed in 1718 to the American colonies. She was now captained by Vincent Pierce, who carried the King's pardon to the pirates of Nassau, New Providence, known as the Flying Gang. The vessel had an unfortunate history, and though things were initially looking good, with some major pirates like Benjamin Hornigold aligning himself with Captain Pierce, things soon took a turn for the worse. This worst came in the form of the aforementioned Captain Charles Vane, a die-hard Jacobite who had no intentions of taking the pardon. Vane was actively disliked by Hornigold and the other pro-Pardonists, and they gave Pierce the directions to his hideout. The Phoenix blocked the entry to Vane's harbor and opened fire upon the pirate camp. Vane and his men soon surrendered, but tried to convince the captain that they had totally intended to go and take the pardon. Pierce wasn't an idiot and clapped the pirates in chains. But when he came back to Nassau, Hornigold and the others obliged him to liberate Vane and company in order to set a peaceful precedent. And Pierce agreed, but confiscated Vane's sloop, the Lark, fitting her out as a merchant vessel and intending to make a profit from her himself. The Navy didn't always pay well. Pierce had the advantage in that the 24-gun Phoenix was the most heavily armed vessel on Providence. This largely functioned to scare the pirates into submission, but as time went on, they became more defiant. On the king's birthday, they set a merchant ship on fire. Happy birthday, I guess? Can you blow out the candles? Probably not. Meanwhile, Vane and his men had taken a rowboat and returned to piracy, capturing several vessels. They were able to use Nassau's geography, the narrow passage, to sail unimpeded in and out of the harbor, where the heavier Phoenix would have run aground. They were able to plunder their prizes right in front of Pierce's eyes. At night, Pierce and his men set out in a boat and attempted to take the pirates, but Vane suspected their trick and fired upon them as they approached. The situation deteriorated. Vane was turning into a hero, and more pirates were coming to his side. He even managed to recapture the Lark, with most of Pierce's designated sailors defecting to his side. On April 6, the carpenters set fire to the Phoenix by accident while boiling tar, and though the fire was suppressed, Pierce had enough. He raised anchor and returned to New York. He would later testify at Vane's trial. In 1727, the Phoenix was broken up again and reassembled. She saw some minor success in the Caribbean and was even used during the siege of St. Augustine in 1740, during the War of Jenkins' Ear, the last hurrah of Caribbean privateers. On this image from an issue of the Gentleman's Magazine from 1740, she can be seen in the harbor of St. Augustine. She was even deployed in battle against the Spanish privateers, who had started the war in the first place. In 1744, after 50 long years of service, the Phoenix was finally deemed unfit, sold, and broken up. Fireships would still be effective against stationary targets, like those anchored in a harbor, and would remain in limited use for the rest of the Age of Sail. They were used by the Navy of the early United States, most remembered for the disaster of the Intrepid in 1804. The Intrepid was a ketch fitted as a fireship, and planned to be used against the Barbary pirates in the harbor of Tripoli. All you gotta do is hit a stationary target. It can't be too difficult. The Intrepid was loaded with the usual range of combustibles, along with mortar shells and 5 tons of gunpowder. This was very dangerous, and most fireships weren't built to actually explode, just burn. So when the Intrepid was directed upon the Corsairs, the cargo exploded prematurely, killing the entire crew of 12. Their usage would peter out in the rest of the 19th century. The maritime scene had a strong influence on life outside of the ocean. Nautical lingo has entered the common tongue. When I'm taken aback, I'll tell you to batten down the hatches. According to a dictionary of slang from the late 17th century, fireship referred to a prostitute who was especially proficient. Sailors, beware. A lot of you watching engage in various forms of creative endeavors, ranging from novel writing to game design. Some of you have expressed interest or contacted me for consultation in your projects. So with the advice from one of my clients, I have set up a Fiverr account, where you can now hire me to consult on your project. I offer research, proofreading, editing, and critique, or we can just spitball ideas. You'll find a link in the video description or pinned comment below, and if you have any questions you can just send them by email or Discord. Otherwise, support Gold Gunpowder by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing and clicking the notification bell, monetarily by buying some merch, or becoming a Patreon supporter, where $1 a month gets you early, ad-free and sponsor-free access to all of my videos.